To get started, you need a photo of yourself and some tracing paper. If you don't have a fancy light box to trace, all you need is a clear Tupperware container and either a push light or a bulb that can plug in. You could also trace against a window in the daytime. Go ahead and tape your photo to the back of your tracing paper just so it doesn't slide around while you're tracing. I also went into Photoshop and converted my picture to black and white and used the cutout filter to limit the number of grays to 5. So in other words, there's going to be 5 levels on our value scale. If you don't have access to Photoshop, don't worry, you can still do this project at home. You'll just have to divide the shadows and highlights as you trace. Go ahead and place your paper on top of your light box or against the window, and you'll see pretty quickly how much easier it is to trace with the light coming through it. So you're just drawing pencil lines around each of those gray shapes you see. Before you start painting, label your shapes according to how light or dark they are. I labeled my lightest shapes with 1 and my darkest shapes with 5, because remember in Photoshop, I set the filter to have 5 levels. Let's review a few things before we get started. A value scale shows how a color ranges from light to dark. The true hue is right in the middle, so that would be the color that isn't mixed with anything to make it lighter or darker. When you add white to your true hue, you get a tint. And when you add black to your true hue, you get a shade. I created this value scale for my true hue that I'm using for my self-portrait. There's 5 levels on my scale because there's 5 numbers on my picture. There's actually an extra 6th level, but I'll show you later why I added that. I wanted to start with the darkest shade on my value scale, so I'm going to mix a pretty dark version of this coral color I'm using for my true hue. A little bit of black goes a long way, so add a tiny bit to your true hue and you can always add more when you need to. And then start to paint in all the shapes that you labeled with a number 5. For your 4th value, add a little bit of black to your true hue, but not nearly as much black as you added for your 5th value. And then paint in all the shapes that you labeled with a number 4. The 3rd value is right in the middle of my value scale with 2 tints on one side and 2 shades on the other. So I don't have to mix anything for this. Unless you wanted to mix a custom true hue, then you can just use the straight out of the bottle color with no white or black added. For my 2nd value, I'm mixing a little bit of white with my true hue. Notice that when I'm mixing paint on my palette paper, I'm keeping the puddle of paint pretty small. I'm not creating a giant circle that takes up a whole lot of space on that palette paper. If you create a big area of paint, it will dry a lot faster and you'll have a lot less usable paint. And also it'll take up all the space on your palette paper and you won't have room to mix any more colors. For my first value, I'm going to create a really light version of my true hue. So I'm going to add quite a bit of white and paint in all the spaces that I labeled with a number 1. As you can see, I have some empty spaces that I forgot to number. And I noticed that there was a really big difference in between my 4th and 5th values, so I decided to just create an extra value that went in between those two and fill in all those empty spaces that were left. Because my eyes have so many tiny details, I just saved those for last instead of painting those along with the rest of my numbers. I also chose to add a few extra lines around my mouth and nose just to define those areas a little bit more. Add a background and you're all finished.